welcome to another episode of Who Corner to Corner podcast. My name is Paul, and as always, I'm here with my good friend Geoff, but we are joined by a very special guest, someone who is a true legend from the worlds of Doctor Who. As script editor for the final years of the classic series, he gradually moved our favourite TV show towards stories that not only thrilled us with vampires rising from the sea, killer clowns, werewolves, and androids with a remarkable resemblance to a brand of popular sweets, but which focused on character and relationships, particularly those of new companion Ace, and reintroduced the enigma of Doctor Who. Since leaving Doctor Who, he's gone on to write the highly acclaimed best-selling vinyl detective series of novels, and has recently launched a brand new book series, The Paperback Sleuth, the second book of which, ASHRAM ASSASSIN, has just been released. Ladies and gentlemen, Who fans across the world, it is my pleasure to introduce the legendary Mr. Andrew Cartmel. Andrew, hello, sir.
Oh, great introduction, Paul. I feel that I can just go home now. I don't really need to do it anymore.
That's the end of it now, yeah.
Yeah, that's as good as this podcast gets, actually, to be honest, because, you know, I spent literally 2 minutes writing on that. So, firstly, congrats on the new book. As we said, it's called ASHRAM ASSASSIN, which is the second in the Paperback Sleuth series. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah, indeed.
I haven't attempted it.
This is early morning, and I've only just had my coffee, so I'm still kind of buzzing on the espresso at the moment. But can you tell our listeners a little bit about it, please?
Okay, so I'm writing, as you say, these two crime series. They're what they call cozy crime, which I sort of I draw the distinction between those and what I like to call Scandinavian Danish disembowelment, the more grisly end of Scandi noir, which I like, but it's not the only form of crime. So this is more in the direction of, say, Agatha Christie or something like that. It does have its Danish disembowelment moments, but it also has at its heart a band of regular characters and some cats. And so the vinyl detective is about a guy who's not entirely unlike me, who is I'll just turn my camera around here so you can see the record player. Who's
titles.
So a guy like me who's crazy about music in the form of vinyl, and he goes hunting for old records in charity shops and boot fairs and stuff. And that all came about because my friend Ben Aaranovitch has a best-selling series of novels, the Rivers of London series, and he counseled me that the best way to have a successful series of novels is to write about what you really love. So I wrote about I love crime fiction, but I wrote about a detective whose area of expertise was records, vinyl, collecting records. So that we're now on book 7 of that, and I'm starting to write book 8. And my publisher wanted a second series, and I decided to do. I thought, what else am I obsessed with besides vinyl? And vintage paperbacks, which I do love. I'm just having a look around, see if I grab some. So, it's what people would call pulp paperbacks these days. And so I thought, I can write about that because, again, it's an area I know. And again, it's sort of when you have a detective, the main thing they do is the detection, but they need to have some other string to their bow just to be interesting. So, I believe that Nero Wolfe was an expert in orchids, and various detectives have various other areas of obsession and expertise. So in this case, the Paperback Sleuth, who's a young woman, is obsessed with collecting vintage paperbacks. And I've got the two books exist in the same world. There's a lot of overlap between the characters. And I should add that there's a strong element of humor, so that people won't think that they're just in for non-stop crime. And also, in case anybody out there isn't a cat fan, the ASHRAM Assassin is part of a series. The Paperback Sleuth series involves dogs, not cats. So I think everybody's covered, unless you hate both, in which case
you need to start a third series.
In which case, there's something wrong with you. Why would you hate cats or dogs? Honestly, people, it's crazy. Do you know? I mean, I have to say, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass or anything like this, but with the humor aspects and stuff like that, I absolutely love these books. I mean, I read through the first Paperback Sleuth in record time.
Well, thank you.
It's quite unusual for me, and partly because, as I was saying just before we started recording on this, that area of London in which the books
Right.
are set is quite familiar. I went to school in Fulham, so I spent a lot of time, in sort of Barnes Putney. Actually, a lot of my Doctor Who books, the Target novels back in the day, were bought from W.H. Smith in Putney. So,
Oh, how lovely. Yeah, yeah.
there's a little connection there. But I have to say, I absolutely love Cordelia. She's the main protagonist, the paperback sleuth of the novels, and I love the fact that I mean, you cannot buttonhole that character into one word, but I would say she is amoral. She does have a very strong sense of right and wrong, in that she's right and everyone else is wrong.
That's
For a
very
total
true,
loser.
Paul. Yeah, very well put. Amoral is exactly the word for her. When I started my second series, I wanted to contrast it with the final detective. So I made the protagonist a woman. Instead of telling it in the first person, just to get technical here, there's a thing called the close third person, where instead of saying I walked across the room, you said she walked across the room, but feeling a sense of apprehension. So you're sort of inside that character's head, but looking at them from the outside.
Yeah.
So I made it a woman. I made it close third person. I made it dogs, not cats. And crucially, in relation to what you just said, the final detective is a bit of a knight in shining armor in the sense that he has a very strong moral code. She doesn't. She just doesn't, which is kind of really fun to write.
Yeah.
She's just a bit of a bad hat. So and that's terrifically good fun. So yeah, well spotted on that. And Cordelia is a great character to write, not least because she's the sister of the guy he's sort of the running villain in a way in the Vinyl Detective books. He's not a criminal, but he's the thorn in the side of our hero.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I could make his sister the hero of the other books. And just for the record, she hates her brother as much as everybody else in the series. Both series hates him.
So where did her name Cordelia come from? Is that inspired by a certain vampire slaying?
Well spotted, Geoff. How did you know that? Because all that is actually brought into the light in the next book. Which have you read it by any chance?
We have.
We've got in e-copy, haven't
Super.
We do. Yeah, we're still waiting for the physical copy to join my shrine of Andrew Cartmel work.
No, that's great. But you're spot on, Geoff. Yeah, she's named after, I think it's Cordelia Chase, played by Charisma Carpenter. And I love Buffy. So that's.
Same.
I was just casting about for an interesting name, and I came up with Cordelia, and I thought I probably got that in my subconscious from Buffy. So why not make it part of the story?
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Yeah.
So you're quite a fan of sort of 80s, 90s TV, stuff like that?
I'm a fan of good TV from any era. So like back in the late 50s, live television in America had some fantastic stuff by writers like Paddy Chayefsky and directors like John Frankenheimer. Then in the early 60s, British television, we had The Avengers, nothing to do with Marvel comics. It was Stunning and The Prisoner. And so it's not any particular period, it's just certain shows I love. And from that period, I don't know if anything from America came close to Buffy. In Britain, we had things like Edge of Darkness and The Singing Detective, which couldn't be more different, but were also fantastic.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of The Singing Detective, actually. It's one of my favourite TV shows. Such a complex plot told in various flashbacks across different timelines, and totally the whole story is all very subjective. It's that unreliable narrator kind of thing, isn't it? Which also in some ways goes back to Cordelia, because like you said, with that close third person, we see the world entirely through her eyes, and it's just wonderful to be drawn into that viewpoint, especially regardless of how naughty it kind of is.
Yeah, it's great because, and the same thing with the first person in the Vinyl Detective is you can make everything interesting or funny because of the attitude of your characters. So it hopefully saves the books from ever being dull.
Do you think you're drawing both series into a crossover?
Yeah, well, there's already all these neat little overlaps.
Yeah.
And I think that there's sort of a constant low-scale crossover. Whether or not we do a major crossover is an interesting question. One I'll certainly think about. But more interesting than that would be to do a Rivers of London Vinyl Detective crossover, which is something that Ben and I have discussed, and we have done that in a small way. Like one of his characters cropped up in one of my books. In Low Action, we had Lady Ty. This will only mean things to people who read Rivers of London, but she turned up in my book Low Action. So we've done that already in a little way, but we have talked about a full-on crossover, and it's just a matter of finding the right story and also making all of our publishers and agents happy.
Yeah, I remember the excitement in Buffy and Angel when they do that. So there was one where Oz turned up in Buffy, and he had to do something, and he travelled to LA to see Angel. So when you watched that week's Angel episode, he was there, and that kind of.
I love that kind of stuff. I think anybody who's a fan of a particular book or TV series loves those little kind of Easter egg things.
Yeah. And also naming characters or places in things that you write after things that mean something to you is quite fun as well, isn't it? I've done that. We've done some audio drama stuff for the podcast. So, putting in little references to things that I like that maybe no one else will get, but, it's quite a nice little thing to be able
I
to
always do that. And it's incredibly gratifying when somebody does spot one of those.
Yes.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. There's I was just going to say, actually, because you talked about this being a kind of cozy crime. I think it was the word you used. There is a little bit of Scandi disembowelment. I wrote it down here. Scandi disembowelment.
Danish disembowelment. We
Danish
the alliteration.
There you go. Danish disembowelment. But it's something that happens in a vinyl detective story, isn't it? And it's kind of mentioned in the first paper. So that's that kind of crossover there. But what I wanted to say is that in both series of novels, that kind of there's a sort of how did I write it here? There we go. The collector's underworld. It's very, very detailed. Particularly the almost psychotic nature of the uber obsessive collector. So, did you have to do much research for that, or did it kind of come naturally?
No, I mean it's all like low-hanging fruit, including the cow that you described, which is sort of where I live, and it's the world where I live because anybody who's been a comic fan knows that kind of world. Anybody who's been, in fact, a TV show fan, like something like Buffy, Doctor Who, you know that there is this subculture of obsessive, and sometimes overly obsessed people who are fascinating characters in themselves. My friend Nev Fountain's writing a series of books. I don't really feel I should be plugging his, but I sort of trap myself a bit. He's written the first of which is The Fan Who Knew Too Much, and that's all about that world of. There's sort of like a parallel world. Who Doctor Who fans, but it's not Doctor Who. It's a different science fiction show, Vixens of the Void, it's called. But it's all set in that world of kind of cons and obsessives. So that there is certainly a strong flavor of that. Although I would say that actually, I wouldn't say that hi-fi nuts or vinyl nuts are any less obsessed or crazy or eccentric. It's all the same. It's all the same.
It is all kind of taps into that gene. I mean, I do a lot of work in the hi-fi world. I'm on the board of an industry association that is the UK's hi-fi industry association. So we look after the retailers and the vinyl, sort of resellers and everything like that. So I've got first-hand experience of how. Again, I'm trying not to use the word obsessive, but let's say passionate, perhaps.
Well, Paul, the word fan derives from fanatic.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, okay.
That's what we're talking about.
Around it. We are talking about fanaticism. Yeah, it's very true. But it's a lot of fun, isn't it? And I know I keep saying it, but I just love the way this is kind of brought through both series of novels. But I have to say, I mean, for me, I think that the Paperback Sleuth, because I love paperback novels, and I've been there in those shops spinning the spinners, looking at the spines. And if anybody creases a spine on one of my books, I will kill them. There's no two ways about it. I will do that. Sorry, I've just released.
No, well, that's exactly the way it is, Paul. Because the thing is, once you've broken the spine of a paperback, there's no going back, right? It's not that difficult to read a paperback without breaking the spine. I think
Yes,
it separates the goat from the sheep, or whatever that's in terms of people who know how to handle their paperbacks. I wanted to just add, because it might have slipped between the cracks, it's very kind of you to because it's essentially a Doctor Who podcast, to give such a showcase to my novels. But I'm going to ask to also quickly mention my stage plays. So if this is going out in June, in July, I've got a play on at a theatre called the Tabard, which is a pub theatre in Chiswick in West London. And the play is called Dressing Gown, and it's a comedy. And there are going to be 12 performances. And please, anybody who's in that part of London or in that part of the world, do come along. I think you'll like it. It's a great cast, great director, and it's quite a funny play. So, and of course, unlike the book, which is going to be there and be around, this is only going to be during the month of July, and it's only on for 3 weeks. So try and make it if you can.
Make sure to send us the info and the poster and stuff like that, and we can tweet out about it. So
I will make a note while we're talking to do that. Thank you very much, Geoff. Very good.
So this is at the Tabard in where did you say it was?
It's in Chiswick in West London.
Chiswick. Okay, yeah, well, look out for that one. That should be fun. So, how long would it take you to write that play then? Is it a kind of labour of love? Were you asked to do it? Did you just get the story and just had to write it?
Well, the thing with I've always been in love with writing scripts in various forms. I wanted to write for television, and I did, and plays. And I've wanted to write for comics, and I did. And the best thing about plays is that they're relatively, unlike a TV show, they're relatively inexpensive and relatively easy to put on. And so the first time I actually did that was at university. I wrote a play and I put it on and I directed it. And although I did an okay job as a director, I think that I'll always work with another director in the future, because then you've got another mind. It's not, you only know what you know. And if you get another creative intelligence involved, it can really improve things. But it's got to be the right director, because then that immediately becomes a problem. If you're not going to direct it yourself, you've got to find somebody who's who's sympathetic
on the same page as you with it.
And I'm incredibly lucky in that regard, working with Jenny Eastop, who's a really experienced director. And so, in answer to your question, I write plays all the time. I've had plays on the London Fringe before, and during when the pandemic hit, we were just going into production on a play, and which, like so many other endeavors, was knocked on the head by the pandemic. But during the months of lockdown, we started having online play readings. Like I often have play reading. About once a month, I have a play reading at my house. I give the actors lunch. We sit around the table and do it. During lockdown, that wasn't possible. So we did virtual play readings using Zoom, right? But what that meant is that it started becoming a regular weekly thing. And so I would write I'd write a new short play just for the next Thursday play. Right. Really got me in the habit of doing quite a lot. So I am quite prolific in terms of stuff I write, but then I choose very carefully about what we should do next. And, it's not just me choosing. When we did a reading of this play that I'm talking about, Dressing Gown, the comedy, it's actually a farce. I'm not going to say it's a sex farce. It's a sexy farce, and it's fun. But people said we should do this. Like there was this instant reaction that we should do this, and that it was this one really made the grade. So that's why this particular play is happening, is because it got a huge vote of confidence from the actors and the director. And so it's really a lovely feeling when that happens. Not as lovely as when you get a full house of people laughing at all the right places, which we hope will happen. The thing about live theater is it's, as it says on it, it's live, it's completely unpredictable. But that's both the terrifying and the wonderful thing about it,
and the fun thing,
the gratification as well. It's immediate. Instantly how it's going down with your audience, don't you? I suppose.
Well, and also that the whole thing about theatre is that, unlike a movie or a TV show, it is happening right there in the room with you. It's an extraordinary experience, and it throws a particular kind of magic over the room that nothing else quite does, and it's very very intoxicating and very seductive for a writer, because there's no other thrill quite like it.
We went to see the play that Chris Chibnall wrote recently, One Last Push, wasn't it? Yeah, and that was kind of a farce as well.
It was, definitely,
all escalated.
What was it called?
It's called
One Last Push.
One Last Push.
Yeah.
It was indeed. I had the thing to it somewhere. I might have cleared it around.
Well, that's where Chris came from. He that's how he broke into television. He'd written a play which was very well received. I think it was called "Kiss Me Like You Mean It." I might have got that slightly wrong, but yeah. So he's kind of come full circle there.
And it's interesting what you said, Andrew, about you have all these ideas, and some might become a book, or some might be for a comic or a stage show. And Chris has done similar. He's got a crime thriller novel coming out as well, and he's obviously just got lots of different ideas, and isn't kind of restricted in just doing it for TV or whatever it might be, just kind of throwing it all out there and trying.
I do feel that crime is Chibnall's strength. I thought that of the many things he's done, Broadchurch was the one that really rang the bell for me.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, really.
Yeah, that was a cracker.
Mm.
Just going back to some of your stuff, Andrew. So very recently, I read also Atom Bomb Blues, which is a Seventh Doctor
That
and
might be
Ace
the
novel.
last Doctor Who novel. I think it's certainly
I
the
think it
last
was.
novel that I wrote. I might have written
Mm.
some shorter fiction since then.
Yeah, but it's quite interesting because this features the Seventh Doctor and Ace going back in time to the Manhattan Project, where they encounter Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
Obviously, thanks to Chris Nolan, is now back in vogue. But
it's all
also,
terribly topical. Yeah, and
indeed,
I
yeah,
did quite a lot of research about that because
mm,
it's a terrifying and crucial moment in world
Yeah,
history.
yeah.
Also, I should mention a novel by Martin Cruz Smith called Stallion Gate, which is also about
mm,
the the atom bomb project and those characters, and it's a really good
yeah.
novel. So I don't want to not recommend my book to people, atom bomb, because folks, but I'd certainly say take a look at
Yeah.
Stallion Gate by Martin Cruz Smith, which was about
Mm.
the development of the bomb in the desert. It's a brilliant novel, brilliant thriller.
But I bet it doesn't feature an obsessive vinyl collector, which this does, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Actually,
in
you know,
fact, in those
so
days, dude, it would have been shellac because vinyl hadn't yet been invented. They used to use this strange material called shellac, which was very
yes.
to make records, which was highly fragile, and in
Mm.
fact is I think it's made out of insects. It's either an insect secretion or made from the insects themselves.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lovely stuff.
Very nice. Yes.
But it's
Anyways.
100% natural there. There you go.
I'm going to
So
be looking that up after we finish talking.
yeah, do you know what, actually? Because we're talking about the Hi-Fi Association I'm part of. There's we had a guy at our conference last week, and he was talking about some new material which they're using, because obviously one of the downsides of vinyl is the fact it's not very environmentally friendly. So you know, there's a lot of it in landfill. So he was
Yeah,
talking
it's
about some.
ultimately a fossil fuel thing. And in landfills, yeah.
Mm,
Thing is, you can melt down vinyl and recycle it, but it's very noisy, so it's not good for from a high fidelity point of view.
no, that's it, and obviously that's part of the trade-off, isn't it? So you have a material that may be, you know, very environmentally friendly, recyclable, easy to break down, all the rest of it. But actually, how good is it in reproducing
Mm.
the actual music and playing on a turntable and stuff? So it's
The
but
main
they
problem with recycled vinyl, in my understanding, is that people who would
mm,
recycle records, they wouldn't bother removing the labels. So you ended up with fragments of paper in there. So if you at least just punch out the center, I think
Yeah.
yeah.
you could probably recycle vinyl at quite a high standard. But it's the usual thing, like it costs a little more to do that, so people wouldn't do it.
Mm.
Yeah. This is true, actually. So, how much of I know you showed us your collection there, but music, records, this is really important stuff to you, right?
Well, yeah, I sort of I started keeping a diary of my
Mm,
record listening because it was useful. I could extract bits. Like if I write some jazz journalism, so it was a use. If I had notes about a particular record, it might be useful. And also, I like to keep track of what I've been listening to. And also, if you've got a big record collection, uh, any collector's been here, I'm sure that you sometimes forget what you've got and you end up
yeah.
finding it again. So it's nice to have kind of database of what I'm doing. But I looked at my diary of music
Mm,
listening, and I hadn't listened to an LP, a vinyl record for over a month. But a friend had bought some records over from the States because what I do is I buy stuff off Discogs or eBay from American dealers and I get them sent to my friend in California, the poor guy, and he brings them over occasionally because it's a lot safer and a lot cheaper than shipping them
Mm.
internationally. But so he brought over a record that had been with him for
mm,
years. We just hadn't had a chance to do this, and it was a very rare jazz record, a Blue Note record by Dizzy Reese.
yeah.
And I sort of thought, this record cost a lot of money. It cost $500 when I bought it. It now costs about $1,000. And I sort of thought, you know
Wow.
what? It's probably scratched to hell. I mean, what am I doing with this? And I put it on and it was magic.
Oh,
And
right.
the rain was falling outside. The record was immaculate. It was this
Mm,
great music. It was this incredibly rare album. And I was just such a wonderful kind of spellbinding moment. I thought, okay, now I understand why I do this. And I
yeah.
realized that I'd sort of been thinking, oh, maybe I've lost my love for vinyl, but I hadn't. It's just that I hadn't had an opportunity to sit down and to remind myself uh, what it was that had made this such an important thing in my life in the first place. Just this love of music. I don't want people to think that it's this kind of thing where it's all about the technical side of things.
Mm,
it's not. It's about loving music and vinyl being the best way we've come across yet to deliver music. Seriously, like you can forget about your downloads, guys. Forget about streaming. A really good vinyl record on a really good playback system is as close as you can get. Perhaps the only better thing would be a really good reel-to-reel tape on a superb system, but tape stretches and vinyl doesn't. So that's vinyl is over time, vinyl is more likely to survive. Or a live radio broadcast where you've got some people playing the music in the room, transmitted to you on a really good radio. It's got to be FM, it can't be digital. That would probably be better than vinyl. But there are very few things that are better.
Yeah.
Vinyl is just a way of trying to be in the room with musicians. And it was, it was fabulous. So I do occasionally, when I do stand and listen, I'm reminded of how great it is. And in case I'm sounding like this, I'm only interested in a record that was recorded in 1958. By the way, that record was called Blues in Trinity, which is a strange kind of coincidence because Trinity was the code name for the bomb project. It's got nothing to do with that, but it just happens to be. In case it seems I'm only listening to jazz from 1958, I just got the Record Store Day release of the new St. Vincent album, which is called something like All Born Screaming. And I think it's wonderful. So it's not just a case of listening to old jazz. And Janelle Monáe is another favorite of mine, and Arlo Parks. So there's all this fabulous stuff coming out.
I see a lot of limited edition vinyl releases and coloured vinyl and stuff, and so if for me, like steel books for Blu-rays or something, I like things in a nice, case,
package,
nice package, collector's edition. And if a band puts something out in a nice gatefold box and things, and I'll buy that. And I see all these vinyls, and I think, I don't even have a vinyl player, but damn, that stuff looks nice.
But the thing is, they're such beautiful objects. I know who buy them before they've got a record player, because they are. I mean, in a way that CD never was, never could be. They're just, and obviously anything online can't be. It's just a beautiful physical object and really nice to have.
I still buy the stuff unless it's a single that you can't really, that you only get them digitally now. I always buy an album on disc, copy it onto my iTunes, onto my phone, and then whenever I'm out with my family, my wife's got Apple Music on her phone, and she never has any signal, so it never works. We can never listen to anything, and I always say, why don't you just load it onto your phone, and then you won't have this problem.
I don't want to seem like a complete dinosaur. When I'm busy writing a book, anybody who doesn't know about records, you need to turn them over every 20 minutes or put another record on because they only play for 20 minutes. So if I'm really busy, I'll stick on a CD. Because it'll play for 70 minutes. Plus, if I'm really in the zone, I can just pick up the remote control, press play again, and I got another 70 minutes of music before I have to surface. So these things all have their place. And I listen to digital radio. I listen to Radio 6 music, which I love. Get the fantastic tips for new music to listen to. I mean, I think that's where St. Vincent came from. I was listening to something, I thought, is this Prince? And it was St. Vincent. So it's a really valuable resource. But then I go out and buy her stuff on vinyl, right? So, Oh, and I should just mention, in the same spirit as promoting my play, I do have a radio show called
Indeed. I was going
Vinyl.
So if anybody's interested in the kind of music, wants to know a bit more about the kind of music I'd recommend, that's worth a listen. And it's available. When I say it's a radio show, it's a purely online radio show, but it is on 2 platforms. I started out on one, so it's gradually taking over the world.
Is this the show on Medway Pride Radio? Is it?
So Medway Pride, and it's also on Reclaimed Radio. I love Medway Pride, but I would recommend Reclaimed Radio as having an easier functionality. If you go into if you Google Reclaimed Radio, Vinyl Detected Radio, it's just that it's easier to access the archive of shows and to play them. Often these things are bewilderingly complicated to map. And I just think that Kyle, who does Reclaimed Radio, does a brilliant job of making it simple and straightforward.
Fantastic. We'll put the links to that on the promos for the show as well. Just to finish off on the whole vinyl thing, I have to say, years, it probably only about 3 or 4 years ago, just pre-lockdown, because again, I've got a pretty nice turntable and speaker system set up downstairs, and I had and I got someone had given me the what is it, the Now That's What I Call Christmas as an LP, right? Which whatever. But I thought, okay, right, I'm going to get the kids. I said to the kids, look what I've got, because I know they love their Christmas songs and everything else. And my oldest daughter, she would have been 13, 14 at the time. And I said to her, no, come on, let's listen to it. She's like, oh, no. Because they all listen to music on blooming YouTube, right? Which for me is
Oh,
just,
yeah,
just the absolute worst. At least it was then. It's better now, but it was awful then. And I said, just listen, right? So I put on, and the first song is Wham, Last Christmas. And and it starts playing out, and my daughter, I could see it in her face, and she goes, I've never heard it sound like that, and
that's that revelation. I mean,
it is, isn't it?
because
Yeah.
for years and years, I had a great record player, quite a large record collection. And it just gathered dust. I was just listening to CDs. And one day I was searching for a particular CD, and I went to this film, as a store that sold film soundtracks, and they're going out of business. They were getting rid of all their LPs really cheap. So I ended up buying like 100 LPs, pounds each. And so because I'd bought these, I started playing. I thought, my God, this is what I've been missing. It sounds so much better. And since that point, there's been no looking back. Well, maybe I was looking back yesterday until I played Blues for Trinity, and now I'm looking forward again. But if you wanted to do an interesting segue from the world of vinyl to the world of Doctor Who, in my latest Final Detective novel,
Here we go. Yeah.
which is called Noise Floor. It actually features one of its characters, just sort of peripheral character off stage, Dominic Glynn, who of course, Dominic does sort of a little cameo. He plays at a gig in my novel, and he was actually incredibly helpful because each of my Vinyl Detective novels is about a genre of music, and in case of Noise Floor, it was about electronic dance music, which had its heyday in the 90s. And Dominic was right in the middle of that scene, right in the middle of the raves, on the London Orbital and all that. And he did this wonderful thing in a telephone conversation that we had before I started the book, where he kind of brought that whole scene to life for me in a really vivid and haunting way. And it was really absolutely priceless contribution to the formulation of that book. So anyway, for people who like Doctor Who, there's a Doctor Who crossover in that novel.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So Dominic Glynn's he did the Sixth Doctor, Trial of the Time Lord.
I think that was
arrangement,
when
didn't he?
He's got started.
Which would have been pre,
John Nathan Turner was that he would give new talent a chance, and I think Dom just sent him in a tape, and John liked it, and like almost no other television producer would behave in this way, but John would. He gave people like me a chance. So he brought Dom in, and Dominic did the music, as you say, for Trial of the Time Lord. In my era, he did shows like he did the Happiness Patrol.
Yeah.
And did he do Dragonfire? He did Survival.
I'll find out if he did Dragonfire.
All of his stuff was really. I think he did the three-parters. So that would have been no, but he didn't do Ghostlight, did he? Did do Survival, didn't do Ghostlight, did do the Happiness Patrol, because I remember the fabulous blues music in that. No, but Dominic did this extraordinary stuff, and he also did all this amazing kind of raving, trancey music. So he's the man for that era.
He's the man for that. He did indeed do Dragonfire, the Happiness Patrol, and Survival.
Yeah, marvelous stuff.
Fantastic. So nice segue into Doctor Who. Thank you for that, Andrew. So let's go back
before we start. I'd like to say, what does corner to corner mean?
Geoff, I'll let you answer that one.
So during lockdown, Paul and I were, like everyone, kind of a bit bored at home, and we said, why don't we start a podcast and look at Marvel films, because Paul had never watched, had only watched a couple of them. So I said, we can approach it from you as a new fan and me as having seen the films a couple of times each. And I said, so we're kind of going from one corner to the other corner with our viewing experience.
I see.
We finished all the Marvel films up to what was out at the time.
Yeah.
And then we said, we really enjoyed doing this, so why don't we carry on with our main true love for
obsession.
So corner to corner, we're going from one corner to the other and beyond, and taking fans and other people from the show and everyone with us as we explore all aspects of Doctor Who. So that's where it came from.
Everybody from the expert to the novice.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and from the new to the old as well.
Yeah.
You know, we have a few shows where we invite other fans on, and they're across the spectrum. Some are, I don't think any are quite as old as me, but we have some young kids on there who are just sort of experiencing Doctor Who for the first time and opening up
Speaking of
this
the new,
old catalogue.
I just want to say how great I think Millie Gibson is. I understand that she's gone, but I think she's a great, she's one of the great Doctor Who companions. She's wonderful.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, and obviously by the time this podcast goes out, actually would have seen most, if not all, of the first series. I think actually. Yeah, interesting. Right. Yeah. So yeah. So tell us, Andrew, if you would please, going right back to the beginning of the Doctor Who journey for you. How did it all start? Where and when did you actually get the gig for Doctor Who?
Well, I was trying to break into writing for television, and I'd written a bunch of scripts, and I'd got as far as getting an agent, which is pretty good going. And even I'd had some scripts options, so I'd got some money, but everything had stalled. So I thought, I have to face the possibility that this career path may not be for me. So I'd done a BSc in computer science, and I thought, and I'd then spent a year or two off writing. I thought I kind of needed to burnish my credentials. So I went back to university and did a 1-year postgrad kind of thing in computing. And then on the back of that, I got a very good job in Cambridge, doing a kind of high-flying computing job. And there was a lovely company, and it was a really great job, but it really wasn't for me, because I don't really care about that stuff. I mean, I was sort of faking it, because I didn't go to work thinking, oh, I'm really concerned about this project. I just thought, kind of pretending to be one of these people. And they're really nice people, but I just didn't care about the work. And thankfully, miraculously, while this was going on, my agent, who was a mate of John Nathan Turner's, got in touch to say that John was looking for a new script editor. Because what had happened is that he and Eric Saward had a falling out, so Eric was out of the picture, and then the show was sort of semi-cancelled. They're always trying to cancel Doctor Who. I always quote that Monty Python skit about burying the cat. It took so long because the cat wouldn't stop struggling. Well, that's what Doctor Who was about. Like they kept trying to cancel it, but they'd uncancelled it, and suddenly John was in a ghost state without a script editor. He needed to move fast and get a script editor. And Richard Wakely, who was my agent, recommended me. And I left Cambridge, went down to London for an interview with John, and we got along. And then he offered me the job, and then I had to make this terrifying decision. It seems ridiculous in retrospect that I ever had anything to think about, but I had this highly paid, very kind of secure, rather dull job in Cambridge, and I'd have to just abandon that whole path and return to do, to the world of television. And I did. Of course, I did the right thing. And so I moved back down to London, and I had a girlfriend who had a flat in London, which was helpful, so I could crash with her for a while. And I became script editor on Doctor Who.
It's I think, for quite a lot of creative people, doing essentially like an office job like that is, it's not really the dream, is it? Like you said, you could do it, but your heart would never really be in it. And
you'd need to be doing the other thing too. Like you'd need to get up early in the morning and be writing novels, doing something else.
Not do it, could you?
which I wasn't at the time. I'd sort of just kind of forsaken the creative life, and I'm so. It's not been an easy or smooth path since then, but it's certainly been the right path.
Yeah.
And what was it like? Because you were quite a young guy at the time, and suddenly coming in, kind of fresh-faced, I guess, to the halls of this big old boys corporation, perhaps. How did it kind of feel walking the halls?
I think I've mentioned this I've written a memoir about this time called Script Doctor. The place smelled like a school, and I was there when it was fairly empty, because I think it's sort of holiday time. And so you'd walk past these empty rooms, which were like empty classrooms, and the place just smelled like a not very glamorous school. I mean, there were various BBC buildings. It's a big organization, but this was Threshold and Threshold Stroke Union House, which is a twin building in Shepherd's Bush Green. And that's what this place was like. And I didn't find it intimidating at all, because crucially I had a firm fix on how we could do Doctor Who, which would be interesting, because I've been reading all these great Alan Moore comics, which had sort of it reinvigorated comic books just by taking a kind of sophisticated, exciting approach to them without limitations. I mean, So that was the work of Alan Moore. There's another guy called Simon Moore, who's a TV writer who was also very influential. Because what, excuse me, what both Simon Moore and Alan Moore did is they suddenly approached the stuff as though there were no limitations.
Yeah.
Like people, especially in comics, that would be an obvious example, would fall into writing in a very kind of limited, cliched way, because that's the way it had been done before. And it takes a genius like Alan Moore to come along and say, no, you could ignore all those rules, do it this completely different way. And it's mind-blowing. But Simon Moore had sort of done that on television with a TV series called Inside Out, completely forgotten now. But it was incredibly hip and cutting edge and smart and funny with really cool characters. And it moved like an American TV series. At this time, British television was very slow moving and quite dull. And it moved like a series like Hill Street Blues or something. And Simon Moore almost immediately went to Hollywood, where he wrote a bunch of movies and got sucked into writing high-end, very well paid, but not very exciting TV series. But on the way, he wrote a British miniseries for Channel 4 called Traffic with a K. And that became Traffic, the Oscar-winning movie with Michael Douglas in it. So that is who Simon Moore is. He's the guy who created Traffic.
Yes, I've seen that film. Yeah, it was good.
You should get the original Channel 4 TV series, which is way better.
Okay.
And but all of everything that's in the movie that is good is taken straight from Simon Moore. And I'm just going to go off on one now. The screenwriter, who I think is called Steve Gagan, won an Oscar for Traffic, and Simon Moore didn't get anything because it's all about the kind of credit. If he'd got a credit that said story by Simon Moore, he would have shared in the Oscar, but he didn't. It said something like based on a Channel 4 series by. So basically, because of his credit, he didn't get share in the Oscar, but he should have done, because all of the ideas that made that movie and that won the Oscar were Simon Moore's ideas. So he's this incredible. I mean, just to give a very brief flavor of Traffic, it's about this woman who has she's very wealthy. She got this lovely life with her wealthy husband, and everything's totally. She discovers her husband's suddenly arrested and taken to prison. It turns out that he's not a respectable, construction guy or something. He's in the heroin business, and like this is a complete revelation to her and a complete shock. And she's desperate because she suddenly doesn't have any money and her husband's in prison. And what she decides to do is she decides to take over the heroin business. And she becomes even more ruthless than he is. And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, because it's such a great story. And it's not just that story. It's about all the levels of the drug trade, from the user, the poor user, overdosing in an alley, right up to the people who run the cartels. And it's done, it's an amazingly, completely exciting, dramatic story, and it's brilliantly conceived. So people like Simon Moore and Alan Moore gave me a clear steer on what could be done with Doctor Who. Obviously, we didn't have that kind of budget, but it just had opened my mind to do something very exciting and a little bit more modern and different with the show.
Yeah, what was that? What was the flavour of the conversation with John Nathan Turner at the time? Then perhaps because how do you extend or reinvigorate a show that's been going for so many years, which seems to be kind of loved and hated in equal measure?
You don't have an explicit conversation like that, because that's not really the world works. What happens is that I go into the office, John and I sort of size each other up and work out whether we're going to get along. He says, you've got where's your accent from? And I tell him I'm from Canada, and we talk about this and that. And he said, and the bit towards the end, when it became clear that we could work together, he gave me the kind of standard interview question, which was something like, if you could do anything you want with Doctor Who, what would you like to do? And I'd forgotten about this conversation, but Sylvester McCoy had heard about it, and he reminded me many years later. And what I said is, I'd like to overthrow the government. Now, I have to put it on the record, it was the Thatcher government, which was a hateful government. But the important thing to point out is that, and I'm not backtracking here, when I said overthrow, what I actually meant was bring down. So the distinction is overthrow means overthrow by violent means. That's not what I meant. What I meant is bring down, like through legitimate means, by exposing its own corruption. And the reason why you know that that's true is that there's no way Doctor Who could do either. But there's certainly no way Doctor Who could overthrow the government. But it might be able to bring down the government if somehow I could create like a story which was a parable, which somehow would expose the innate evil of the Thatcher regime. So that's what I meant. I thought I'd like to bring down the government, but I did say overthrow, which has led to some problems over
Slightly
In any case,
misquoted.
I said this to John, and I think he might have chuckled, and he said, "Well, there's no way you can do that. The most you can do on Doctor Who is to say that green people and purple people and white people and black people are all equal. That's about the most you can do." And that's as much as we got into it at that time. And I don't know that we ever really had explicit discussions about what I was trying to do with the show, but I did. After I've been on the show for maybe 6 months or so, it became very clear to me, and I've been able to see some of the great classic stories before, because when I came in, I just had memories of the Hartnell era, of the Dalek story, which I'd seen when I was a kid, which in a way is enough because it's so potent.
Yeah.
And it gives such a great flavor of the show as a kind of scary, mysterious space opera that in a way it was enough. But I got this letter from a fan when I was in my first months in office, and he said, "Please, please, I beg you to watch these stories." And the stories were The Talons of Weng Chiang and The Seeds of Death. Now, I think I mean The Seeds of Death. Is that the Tom Baker one?
Seeds of Doom is Tom Baker one. Yeah.
You see, I
With
always
the big giant.
Yeah, so it was The Seeds of Doom and Talons of Weng Chiang. He said, if you don't know anything about the show, you must see these. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll give it a try. And they were great. They were both great in very different ways. I mean, one was Robert Holmes, which is the Weng Chiang. I think it's Robert Banks Stewart, Seeds of Doom.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were both terrific in very different ways. The Banks Stewart was sort of like a kind of John Wyndham-y thing. Whereas the Robert Holmes is, I think, the great Doctor Who writer. Anyway, they showed me what Who was capable of. And sometime later, that first year, I realized that the big problem with the Doctor was that in recent iterations, he'd lost all sense of being awesome or being mysterious, and he was just like a patsy. I later found out what patsy is actually a term for a specific kind of clown. The clown always gets kicked in the ass, who's always the fall guy, right? So that's exactly what he was, I felt. So he needed to become mysterious, alien, and formidable again. And so by the time we started doing my second season on the show, I began to deliberately try and achieve that. When I say I mean working with some really incredible writers, and also working with Sylv and Sophie, without whom, because of course we had a new Doctor and a new companion who enabled us to put these ideas into action. And also with John, if John Nathan Turner had decided not to allow us to do this, it wouldn't have happened. So we all must always give credit to John as well. Although he wasn't always happy with it. I could see that he was sort of, and he in fact explicitly said once, I'm letting you do as much of this stuff as I can. So he was aware that we were pushing the envelope, and he wasn't entirely happy with it. But he was, and this was one of the great things about him, is that he would give creative people give them freedom to do their own thing, even if he felt that wasn't exactly what he wanted. If he could see that it was really important to you and that you were doing good work, he would let you do that. And again, that's a very, in the same way as giving new talent a chance, that's a rare thing and an incredibly valuable thing, and something that we should never forget that he did, because not enough people do that.
So you weren't a sort of big fan of the show before you got involved with it?
Not at all. I'll tell you, I mentioned that I'd seen those early Hartnell shows, particularly the Dalek one, which blew the bit where they unscrew the top of the Dalek and this. I always thought of it as being like grape jelly, even though it's black and white. So that was burned into my mind. And also when I was a kid, I didn't see much Doctor Who, but I was living in Canada, but I had an aunt in England who sent me the annual. So I had the Dalek annual.
Right. Yeah.
And I think I had the first Doctor Who annual. Is it with the Zarvi on the front and William Hartnell? Anyway, so I had the annuals, which in a way were even better, because then you begin to imagine what the show is rather than actually knowing what the show is. Then when I moved back to England as a teenager, I was sort of peripherally, it would have been the Tom Baker era. And it was kind of cool then. Like, in universities would, in the common room, they would watch Doctor Who on Saturdays. But I didn't watch it, but I was kind of aware of its place in the culture. But that was all. And that was all my only knowledge of the show when I joined up.
So I find that quite interesting that you knew enough about it, but when you got involved, you could, you saw how the show was at the time, and you had these ideas to, develop it and take it further. And sometimes, I've seen conversations online about who should run the show next. And, you know, sometimes people say, oh, it has to be someone who's been a fan for, you know, 40 years or something. And other times they say it needs to be someone, an outsider coming in who can perhaps look at it a little bit differently and, you know, develop it. And I think it was Joss Whedon who once said, sometimes you have to give the audience not what they want, but what they need. And they may not like what happens, but over time you kind of come to realize, actually, you know, narratively, that's the best thing, you know, because it kind of, you know, opens new options and develops things. And I remember there's a show called Veronica Mars that was created by a guy.
Oh, I love Veronica Mars, and I saw the movie too. It's just such a great, it's so great.
It's so good. And not enough people
Roy
know
Thomas,
about
isn't it? Not Roy Thomas of Marvel Comics, but another Roy Thomas.
Rob Thomas, not to be confused with Rob Thomas from the band Matchbox 20.
Okay.
Totally different people. But they did another Veronica Mars mini-series after the movie, which if you haven't seen is well worth seeing.
I must catch up with that.
And it had quite a shocking ending, and people were, you know, outraged and furious about it. But Rob Thomas and Kristen Bell said, we've done this because it's what you need, because if we get to do another series, it's opening up more avenues and dramatic options and stuff for us. So I found that quite interesting. And, you know, you're upset and, you know, by everything that happens, but there's a reason for it, and it's because you're invested in the characters that you get so upset in the first place.
Well, when I was working on Doctor Who, I used to get a lot of scripts from fans, and most of them are pretty terrible. But that doesn't mean that fans are inherently wrong to write for the show, because I also got a script from Marc Platt, who's a dyed-in-the-wool fan and is one of the great Doctor Who writers. But it can be incapacitating if people are obsessed with the minutiae and canon of the show. And it really, I think that showed in I think Steve Moffat is a great writer, but he's not always a great Doctor Who writer, because he gets obsessed with that kind of detail, which is not. I remember that some guy came over to my house who was mending something, some handyman type, and he was talking about he's just seen Doctor Who. I couldn't make head or tail of it. And it was one of those very self-involved, self-referential Moffat stories. And I thought, the thing about Doctor Who is you can make it pleasing to the fans and you can make it part of the great history of Doctor Who. But it's got to be so that somebody who hasn't watched it for years can tune in any given episode and enjoy it as a piece of television without having seen the last 20 episodes. Yeah. It's got to be that as well. And it wasn't that. So I think that's the danger of the fan approach to the show.
I think that's similar to what Stan Lee once said about Marvel comics. You have to think that every Marvel comic could be someone's first Marvel comic, and
brilliant,
you know,
well put.
To be able to read it and understand it, and I remember that
and enjoy it.
Enjoy it. And I remember years ago getting Astonishing X-Men that had started up again, and I thought, I don't really know anyone other than Wolverine, but by the end of that first issue,
you knew them.
I knew them, you know, and it set it all up, and it was brilliantly done. And so I think sometimes pleasing the fans is good, but you have to think, you know, there's probably a bigger audience out there that don't know, you know, the Zarbi or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's so that's absolutely crucial. And the thing is, I came in as somebody who knew very little about the show, but with a very clear idea of how you could do Doctor Who. It was obvious to me that it was part of that lineage of shows, which I mentioned, the Avengers and the Prisoners, which are kind of British eccentric fantasy adventure shows, right? And the thing about all of those shows, well, let's say just to concentrate on the Avengers and Doctor Who for a moment. What makes those shows work in America, and this is where the Paul McGann movie fell down, is that they need to be inherently British or English. They need to have that unique eccentricity. As soon as you try and make them transatlantic, they lose that.
Interesting.
And it's part of that distinctive cultural weirdness, which makes Doctor Who work. I did try and get Alan Moore to write for the show, because I sort of knew him very slightly through comic book circles, where I knew somebody who knew him. And we did chat on the phone about doing a story. And he talked about the Hartnell era, and he talked about poking into dark nursery corners. And I thought, well, that's such a perfect, it shows that he understands that kind of Edwardian kind of view of the show, that sort of era of the show, but that showed that he could see Doctor Who in a certain way that was very Doctor Who-ish. I mean, doctorish is a phrase that John Nathan Turner would often use about something that he thought particularly worked, because it had that particular kind of eccentricity that the Doctor had at his best. And I used to get loads of scripts from very skilled, established
Mm.
writers who were great craftsmen, and they just couldn't do they didn't have a feel for the show. It just wasn't Doctor Who. It was all kinds of things. It wasn't, and I do feel that Doctor Who sometimes wasn't Doctor Who. Vengeance on Varos, which is written by a great writer,
Philip Martin.
right? And he was. I met him. He's a terrific guy, and he wrote Gangsters, which is one of my favorite things on television. I don't think it's Doctor Who. It's certainly not successful Doctor Who. What it is it's kind of a hard-hitting science fiction with this commentary about video nasties, but it's not. It doesn't have that basic Doctor Who magic to it.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And that's one reason that it caused such a stink. I mean, it's quite nasty that there's this bits where, is it Perry who's been transformed into some kind of bird creature?
Yeah.
And it's got the horrifying aspects of, you know, a nightmarish Grimm's fairy tale without the redeeming aspects that Doctor Who should always have. So you have to, what you do is got to have that particular Doctor Who flavor to it. And that's something I had an understanding of. I could see how to do a Doctor Who-ish Doctor Who show, which was the crucial thing I brought to it, even though I'd seen very little of it.
That's quite interesting what you said about the show needing to kind of maintain its Britishness, and you know, when you kind of make it transatlantic, it doesn't work. And for some reason, it's reminding me of The In-Betweeners when they made an American version, and I watched half an episode, and I was like, nope, it's not working. And it just, everything that made the show work just kind of vanished on it, you know.
Well, when I think you do that kind of thing, you need to do a radical reinvention. You have to leave the original way behind and do something that is distinctively American if you're going to do that. And then, I think.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I think the American version of The Office, which is another sort of transatlantic crossover, I think that works better in the US setting than it did in the UK.
Well, it was a huge success, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, without changing it too much, perhaps. But going back to that idea of doctorishness and your ideas to perhaps you know, apply some of that sensibility that you'd seen in the comics and graphic novels and various other things into Doctor Who. How brilliant was Sylvester McCoy for conveying all that? You were there at his audition, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. John was very good about being open about that. I saw the various people, and I actually wrote the audition pieces, the little short scripts that the actors used, which are reprinted in my book, Script Doctor. Yeah, so I did say, and he was really the front runner. The great, to me, shame was that then when we got him, we then did a story called Time in the Rani, which was a story I had very little involvement in. If I'd had full script editorial control, I either would have had that script completely rewritten or abandoned. I didn't. I know a lot of people love it, and a lot of people have a great deal of respect for Pip and Jane Baker, neither of whom are with us.
I mean, this lovely little thing here. I'm just going to put that on
themselves. For you. So, but I don't like Time in the Rani. I don't think it works. It was absolutely not what we were trying to do with the new Doctor and the new show. But so Sylvester's first outing was kind of a non-event. But you're talking about how great Sylvester was. He was potentially great, but he needed to be given the right material, and he didn't begin to be given the right material until we got to Stephen Wyatt's Paradise Towers, where we're only just finding our footing and beginning to understand what to do with the character. Also, no disrespect to Bonnie Langford, but she was a hangover from the old regime, and we needed to clear that away and give him a new companion as well.
It's interesting with... Sorry, go on, Geoff.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, when we spoke to... because we spoke to Sophie Aldred a couple of years back now, actually, isn't it? We spoke to her a couple of times. But one thing we were talking about there was her character. You know, when Ace and Mel have a few scenes together, there's only a few of them in Dragonfire. Oh my goodness, they have such great chemistry. And I was watching it quite recently. It made me think, I kind of wish we'd see more of Ace and Mel together. You know, because Ace seemed to give us a different dimension to Mel. You know what I mean? It was like, you know, we saw something about, so she wasn't just that kind of screaming Cypher that we'd seen previously.
I think Cypher is a perfect summary, but if you look at the character that was created for Mel, she was supposed to be a computer scientist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Character.
That never once came into the show or anything. Had any bearing on it.
Another screamy companion. So that it was a wasted opportunity, basically.
The character came from Pease Pottage, which is very near me in Horsham. And every time I drive past the sign for Pease Pottage, I think about Mel Bush.
Yeah, I mean, it was a character played for laughs and just, you know, she would run and she would scream. And there've been a lot of companions like that, unfortunately. I mean, Leela was the big exception, the cave girl. Yeah. Fabulous. I mean, that was a pointer in the right direction.
Yeah.
And there were some other honorable exceptions, but all too often Doctor Who companions were kind of passive.
Yeah. I think Mel's having a little bit of a resurgence.
She's back in the series
at the moment, isn't she? Yeah. And the character's getting to do
There's nothing wrong with the character, nothing wrong with the actor. The
Mm.
problem was that the scripts they gave her and you know, the very little elbow room she was given.
Yeah.
So when you were considering the Doctor's new companion, you were between Ace and Ray. So and for a while it seemed like it could have gone either way with who you chose. So what was it that made you all decide on Ace and Sophie?
Well, the way it actually worked is that the idea was always to get Sophie Aldred, and that she was the one in the frame. But John liked to keep his options open. We had another actress and another character who was potentially could be slotted in. He was in a much stronger position if anything went wrong with trying to get Sophie on board as the character. So that was very much our backup option. But I don't think we ever seriously thought that in the long run that character would be superior as a companion. We could have made her work absolutely, and she would have been great. I mean, was that Rachel Griffiths?
Yes, I believe it was. Yeah, from Delves from the Bannerman.
As Ray, yeah. I mean, she was wonderful. She was lovely. But the character wasn't as well developed and wasn't as developed with the intention of becoming the companion as Ian Briggs did with Ace and Dragonfire. So she was kind of an emergency backup option. No disrespect.
Right. Yeah.
But it was never like they were level pegging. It was always a case that in the event that something went wrong, then we suddenly had a fallback. Yeah,
you had a backup. That's quite interesting. I wonder if there's an alternate universe in which Ray could have been the Doctor's companion. I kind of get the feeling she would have been a bit more in that sort of traditional sense. I think you look on the strength of Delta and the Bannermen. There is a nice chemistry between her and Sylvester. When they're sort of together, there's a little bit of flirtatiousness and a bit of chemistry going on. But kind of thing outside of that, again, it depends on the scripts, doesn't it? It depends on the stories and what they do to character.
Yeah, she was certainly a great starting point for character. I was going to say more so than Mel, but Mel was never given a chance. But I think we were looking for characters who were more kind of more in the line of the sort of space mechanics you got in the Love and Rockets comics, and certainly Ray and Ace are both much more like that than Mel was with her her girly costumes. Much more tomboys. That's the easiest way of putting it. Much more tomboys.
Yeah. Ace's. I mean, Ace's impact on the show, if you like, it's kind of legendary in a way, because obviously her character continued right through into the Virgin New Adventures, and we saw again quite recently back in Power of the Doctor in the new series, and she seems to have fired off the imagination of quite a lot of other writers as well, who kind of ran with her story.
Well, I've always got the soundbite that while there's a Dalek who may have a piece of Rose's DNA, Rose definitely had a lot of Ace's DNA.
This era was Sylvester was when I kind of really remember starting watching the show.
Oh yes, you did, didn't you? Yeah.
So I very clearly remember Silver Nemesis and things, and I always thought Ace was really cool, and she still is, and Sophie's brilliant, and like Paul said, her kind of impact and legacy has just been kind of constant, throughout everything.
Yeah, and indeed in the television landscape, even in TV and movies, you have to go a long way to find somebody comparable. I think Ripley in the Alien franchise, apart from her, there's very little in the way of sort of strong female characters, in action roles at that time.
Yeah, at that time, yeah.
Okay. So let's have a look at a couple of tweets from some of our followers / listeners. Herald of Creation on X says, in Dragonfire, there is a scene where the Doctor talks to Belash about her loyalty to Kane and the choices she had made. It was the first time that I saw the Doctor I wanted Sylvester McCoy to be, and the slapstick earlier in the season was not the default setting for the era. So maybe it kind of goes back to that difference between the Doctor in Time with the Rani and what we saw him becoming from Paradise Towers onwards, perhaps.
Well, the thing about Sylvester is that he's a brilliant clown and a great comedian. So that was always going to be part of the mix, and it was always something for him to fall back on. But given that we started with Time in the Rani, which was a detour or a dead end, and in fairness, me and my writers, we're still trying to work out what kind of doctor we wanted. We hadn't worked out what Sylvester should be doing. And so he tended to play to his strengths, which, as you say, things like slapstick. But with Ian's thoughtful, and it was the most deep and dark and thoughtful script in that season. We had some very good writers. We had Malcolm Cole and Stephen White as well, but they didn't go in that direction. Ian's stuff was more complex and more challenging, and that gave an opportunity for us to see a more interesting Doctor.
And I think as well, I think in a commentary or an interview, I've heard Sylvester say that it wasn't really until he did Paradise Towers that he got a sense of how gifted he was to have this opportunity to play the Doctor and become something that would be quite, of high status in his career as much as anything else.
Yeah, you're never the same after you play the Doctor.
That's true. So I'm going to read another tweet out here, which is from the Dobson family and Colin the Dalek on X at DobbersW, who says, "My 5-year-old adores Delta and the Bannermen, but we live with a Remembrance Dalek and down the road from the tower in Silver Nemesis. So it's a tie between the three." This is in response to a tweet which we put out there asking for people's kind of favourite Seventh Doctor stories or favourite memories from that kind of era. And the Dobson family has very kindly sent us a couple of pictures, which I've just popped in the chat there, Andrew, so you can have a look at that. There's a brilliant one there of said family enjoying a meal with a Dalek.
I remember that tower. Yeah,
Colin the Dalek. And
but I've got to say, there's absolutely no competition at the Remembrance. It's not only the best. I mean, my favorite story changes from time to time from my era, but the Remembrance is always bubbling up near the top. But Remembrance is not only the best story from my era, I think it's one of the best Doctor Who stories of all time. I really think it's an outstanding classic. So of those three, I'm afraid it's got to be Remembrance.
It's got to be Remembrance. So, I mean, yeah, it's brilliant. My youngest daughter, who in the last few years has become a bit of a Doctor Who fan, in no way related to the fact that I forced her to watch it in the slightest bit.
He didn't tell her she'd be kicked out if she didn't watch it. That didn't happen. That's just
mere details, Geoff. Mere details. But she watched. I sat her in front of Remembrance of the Daleks, and she absolutely loved it. And there's so much going on. It stands up so well today. It's a very strong story. It's incredible.
I mean, it's well directed by Andrew Morgan with a terrific cast. But the crucial thing is that Ben Aaranovitch's script is sheer genius.
So can you tell us about that first meeting you had with Ben? So I've read it in the Script Doctor. I think it's hilarious, but do you want to share it for those who haven't?
Ben, who is one of the greatest TV writers of all time, wanted to become a TV writer. So he'd sent script into the BBC to another script editor called Caroline Olton, who incidentally was the script editor on Inside Out, which I went on about earlier.
Oh, yes.
And so she was a good choice. She couldn't help him, but she... she thought I might be able to help Ben, and my memory is that she dropped off Ben's script, or she suggested to Ben that he should write a Doctor Who script, and she might have dropped it off in person, which was very helpful. Anyway, I got the script from this guy called Ben Aaranovitch, and I had a pile of scripts to read, and I was reading them on the train, and within literally half a page, I knew that this guy was the real thing. It was just fantastic. It was it was Doctor Who, but it was smart and it was funny and it was very sure-footed. It was called Nightfall, with night as in knights in shining armor with a K. And it wasn't the story. That particular story didn't work, but it was very clearly that he could write Doctor Who as a natural. So that was on a Friday when I started reading it. On Monday, I came back to the office, determination to get this guy in to see him, which proved not to be that easy at all, because he'd left a phone number and he was no longer at that address, and we couldn't find. So suddenly I had this writer I desperately wanted to hire, and he presumably desperately wanted to work with, and I just couldn't get in touch with him. So what we did is I got Katie Steele, the wonderful Doctor Who production secretary. She just ran, because Ben's got an unusual surname, Aaranovitch, with two A's, like Aardvark, right? Aaranovitch or Aaranovitch. And so she just rang every Aaranovitch in the phone book and asked if they knew Ben.
Which is how you would have done it back then, without the
internet.
Yeah, I mean, this was pre-internet, folks. It was, we hardly had the telephone. And so what happened then is that we came into the office a couple of days later with a message on the answer phone from Dr. Samuel Aaranovitch saying, "I am Ben's father," and he eventually hooked us up. But it was classic stuff. Like Ben was, he was living in various pads at the time, and then Ben came in. I think he was. I remember he brought a friend of his friend Anna, just to help size me up, and she gave me her seal of approval.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then Ben and I hit it off, obviously, because we were just on the same wavelength in terms of writing. And so we very rapidly formed an alliance, which I don't want to tempt fate, but it endures to this day.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So I think it is brilliant, and actually that kind of ties into another thing I was going to sort of ask you about or chat about, which is this idea of almost like establishing kind of writers' room, right? Which seems to be what you kind of had with, like you said, with Ian, with Stephen.
We were ahead of our time. We sort of had an informal writers' room just because I encouraged the writers to talk to each other and to, if I could make their meetings overlap and we could have a bunch of them together and I'd take them to the canteen. Because if they're all aware of what each other's doing, and if they can help each other out, and we can work on it as a team, just nothing else, it made less arduous for me, and with better results.
Yeah.
And it really was great to have that certain esprit de corps, which I don't think they'd had on the show before. I think it was a case of separate writers getting briefed, and then going home to their various places and writing and sending the stuff in, and never the twain shall meet.
Yeah. How did you cope with having to insert, trying to think of a polite way to do it, to say it, but celebrity casting, for example? So John would have an idea to put Ken Dodds in the show, and you have these great ideas.
The thing was, I frequently had no idea who these people were. I mean, like Dolores Gray. He introduced this woman called Dolores Gray into Silver Nemesis, and it was only like decades later I found an album of her singings.
All right, yeah.
And she's like a huge Broadway musical star. But at the time I had no idea. But obviously she was some kind of star.
Yeah.
And John, well, it never didn't really see. John was so good about letting us do what we wanted to do, me and the writers, that it would have seemed churlish to begrudge him what he loved, which was getting these darlings in, these big stars, even though I'd never heard of Stubby Kaye. Again, a huge Broadway star. I think he was in the original Guys and Dolls, right? So on Broadway. Yeah, so he was in heaven casting these people.
Yeah.
For the most part, it didn't do any harm. The only time I'd say that it did do harm, and it wasn't, was Nicholas Parsons in Fenric, and not because he did a great job. He did a fabulous job. But here's the thing: with Fenric was way over length. And it needed to be desperately cut. And to make it work, what John did, working with the director and the editors, was they just cut a little bit here and a little bit there. They reduced everything a little bit, which sounds like a sensible thing to do, but it just
depends what they just cut though, doesn't it?
It meant that the whole thing, you didn't lose a big chunk of anything, but it meant the whole thing just didn't work. I remember when Fenric came out, and I knew how great the scripts were, and indeed the directing and acting were. I was just desperately unhappy because in my view, it was a total failure. It was only years later when they brought the extended cut into the light of day. I was so pleased because this was the story that I'd seen written and edited and shot. It actually was back. But the point I'm making is, if you wanted to edit that for transmission and make it short enough, what you had to do was remove an entire subplot. You don't trim everything. You leave everything intact except for one thing to pull out. The thing to pull out was the Nicholas Parsons subplot, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because it could go without affecting the whole, right? It would still work. You'd be missing this lovely subplot, but nobody would know that because they'd never seen it. But you see, John could never have done that because it would have been losing Nicholas Parsons. So that's where the star casting bit us on the ass. I mean, I'm not saying that I sat there and said to John, we got to cut the Nicholas Parsons stuff. It only occurred to me years later that way to
would have been a better way to do it. Yeah.
And it simultaneously occurred to me that it could never have happened for the reason I've just outlined. So that's the problem with star casting, is you end up lumbered with people you can't remove it in the editing. I'd stress again that Nicholas Parsons was brilliant in that role, and it was a great subplot. But it was, if you're going to be ruthless, it was expensive.
A bit to go, yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember when I was 16-ish, I think, when Fenric came out, And I absolutely loved it because again it was such an intelligent Doctor Who story. We'd seen the build up with things like Remembrance and the Happiness Patrol and everything else, but this was like Doctor Who on another level. And even as you say, the fact that the original transmitted version was trimmed and truncated and perhaps not quite you and the guys wanted, but nonetheless as a viewer, I absolutely loved it, and I could see the story, and I'm pleased you didn't. That Nicholas wasn't cut out because he was an absolute revelation, like you say.
Yeah.
And actually, that subplot adds to the texture in the body and the strength of the entire thing, perhaps.
No, it absolutely does. But if you're going to be ruthless,
Yeah.
I thought a lot about it. That would be the one.
I'm glad you thought about it years later. So, but like you said, we get the full version.
No, but it was wonderful that you guys saw the truncated version and it still worked for you. For me, it just sucked all the air out of it. Nothing had room just to blossom. Everything was like cut, and the pace was screwed.
You can see that when you watch the extended or the full version, the restored version or whatever it's going to be called. But yeah, at the time, because I remember, I mean, I was in sixth form, so I must be in 16, yeah, so 17-ish, and I just remember kind of defending Doctor Who at the time, and everybody else, within there was no other Doctor Who fans in sixth form at all. I was literally on my own. And it was a case of, oh, Doctor Who is just rubbish. It's just rubbish now, And it's like, no, it's actually really good. And then you have people throwing things at you like, well, they had a man like dressed up like a licorice. I'll start the other way. So that's just rubbish. And you're like, no, it's satire. It's overthrowing the government and all this stuff. And you just sometimes it's like
Now you alluded to Bertie Bassett in your introduction.
I did. Yes.
And I've got to say I love the man, but that was. I can take no credit for that because the way that Graham Curry had conceived the character, the way he was in the script was nothing like that.
Really?
And when I saw what they'd come up with, I thought two things. I thought, wow, this looks great. Number two, we're going to get our asses sued. Both of which turned out to be true.
Yeah, and probably never going to be able to repeat that as well without paying somebody a substantial amount of cash, I guess.
Yeah,
or unless they can CGI over it or something. I don't know.
Well, maybe they will on, they redo the effects on stuff.
Well, no, I think whatever the problem was, it was settled at the time. Because, I mean, isn't that story coming out soon?
I hope so. Yeah, on the collection box set. Well, do you know something we don't, Andrew? Eh?
No, I just know that they're bringing them all out piecemeal.
They are. Yeah. They're coming through. So I'm just going to go back to somebody else's happy memories of the Seventh Doctor. Because we were talking about these. This is from Rihanna Evans on Twitter, who says the Curse of Fenric, which we've just been talking about, is genius. But the cafe scene in Remembrance is my ultimate highlight.
Oh, yeah, the one about slavery. Yeah.
And then she goes on to say, people sometimes mislabel Seven as just dark, but that scene showed how much he struggled with everything he felt he had to do. Very clever and very mature take on the Doctor.
Well, the thing is, both those stories, Remembrance and Fenric, are written by really good writers. Very different writers in a lot of ways. Ian Briggs is a superb writer of character. He digs down deep into the character. But also in Fenric, he had this great richness of context with things like the references to Alan Turing, for instance, and chemical warfare. It's just, and then we were talking about runes earlier, and all that stuff about all the Nordic stuff, all the Viking stuff.
Yeah.
I sat down with Ian and we quite early on worked out that World War II was a great period for Doctor Who story because they can always do historical stories really well. And World War II had not been done to death. And to do it about the Russians rather than the Germans, make them the main characters, again, was really fresh and really new. I'm getting kind of goosebumps thinking about it now.
Yeah.
And then I wanted aquatic vampires in it because I've been reading a Swamp Thing comic by Alan Moore. But then these are just the very starting points, and then what Ian does with that is really extraordinary and really powerful.
And it's a good ace story as well, isn't it? Like you said, because if Ian likes diving into character, he's got aces. I've
got to be careful about saying that Ian created ace because effectively John Nathan Turner and I created ace because we wrote down the character on paper and then gave it to the writers and developed the character. But Ian Briggs took a very two-dimensional character and made her an absolutely three-dimensional character, and then that good work was carried on by people like Rona Munro and Marc Platt and Aaranovitch. But Ian really felt paternal towards Ace, and so he should, because he was the first one out of the gate, and he created the phase space in which we operated. He created the rich environment which allowed for that character to be developed as well as she was.
This was from Rihanna, I think, wasn't it, Paul? But she said fans love season 26, not just for the strength of its stories, but also for the focus on Ace's character and her complex relationship with the Doctor. Yeah. So based on kind of what you were just saying there, I guess you were happy with how all of that played out?
Yeah, but you see, it's a very delicate balancing act, because we were talking earlier about companions just being screamers and runners. Yeah. So you can have these terribly non-entity companions, but as soon as you begin to build up the companions, there's a danger of doing that at the expense of the Doctor, because there's a limit to, in my view, there's a limit to what you can do with the Doctor, because as soon as you start talking about the Doctor's childhood, you're doomed, because the Doctor shouldn't have a childhood. He shouldn't have a background. He shouldn't have a backstory, except in the sense that it's a mystery. So you can't develop, you can't tell the story of the Doctor's childhood trauma, because that, if you go down that route, you diminish the character by making him specific and mundane. So the Doctor has to remain an enigma, but if while he's remaining an enigma, you're pouring all this story energy and character detail into the companion, there's a danger it becomes a companion show. And I remember John Nathan Turner, our producer, explicitly saying that, and saying that we had to be on guard against that, and he's right. So it's a constant balancing act.
But do you think you pulled it off pretty well there?
Well, we pulled it off because it wasn't like you had the Doctor here and the companion over here. They were working together as a team.
Yeah.
And so often the enrichment of Ace was achieved through the Doctor. So you give them both story energy. So that works. That works very well. In fact, one of my early rules on the show was to not separate the Doctor and Ace, to try not to separate them at all. And that was, in fact, a reaction against a very kind of standard Golden Age Doctor Who story in which they land. In fact, I wrote this down, so I had a Doctor Who flowchart somewhere.
Oh, did you?
Tried a really bad Doctor Who story. You land on a planet, they leave the TARDIS, they separate, they have all these adventures, the TARDIS gets taken away, and the reason for that is that if you're a very busy professional writer and you don't really care that deeply about Doctor Who, that's a good way to write a story and quite an efficient story, but not a very good story, because as soon as you separate the Doctor and the companion, you may be generating pages of your script and burning up the story quicker. What you're not doing is doing full justice to the characters or to the show, in which it should be about the Doctor and the companion interacting somehow.
Well, when you look at something like Ghostlight, which is like the perfect example of the antithesis of that, flowchart that you're saying, it's it works so well, and it gives space for Ace to breathe and to explore herself and her her past and everything else, and also gives us the enigma of the Doctor, because he's kind of been manipulating things in the background, and he's very much a part of that, and he's drawing things out of Ace, so he's provoking and driving her, which in turn also drives the storiness. Plus, we've got everything else in the story going on, which is all kind of not only literal but symbolic and metaphorical and everything else. Oh my God, Joe, we could spend hours talking about Ghostlight. I'm not going to, but it's a good example, I think, of what you've just been saying, Andrew.
Marc Platt did an incredible job on that, and so did Michael Waring, the director.
Yeah, because
Alan Waring, forgive me, but Michael Waring was a great producer. Alan Waring did it astonishingly good, and the design and costumes were all great. But you're talking about the character of the Doctor and Ace. What is interesting about the story is that the other characters are so fantastic and well formed too. And it's it's a mega creepy story, and it's beautifully done.
And one of the things I like about that, you mentioned about the director, is the fact they turn the lights down as well, which helps massively. You didn't see that often in TV shows in the 80s.
It depended on who you got as your lighting cameraman, because some people were artists and some people were no more than technicians. And in that case, it was genuine artistry which was on show.
Yeah,
which is good to see.
We had some thoughts from Didymus Holmes on Facebook.
We do.
And they said, my favourite Seventh Doctor story is probably the greatest show in the galaxy. It's absolutely bonkers, intelligently meta, darkly hilarious, and as a child it completely freaked me out. I'm still wary of clowns to this day.
Quite right.
But
There's
Thomas,
actually a word, and I can't remember what it is, but it
Yeah.
means clownophobia, fear of clowns.
oh,
I'm
yeah.
gonna.
It's
I'm
actually a
gonna Google
thing. I
that
thought it
right
was just
now.
me.
And if you remember, Xander in Buffy is terrified of clowns, and in the episode where the fear demon arrives, that's the thing that scares him.
Well, clowns are inherently creepy. I don't,
Yeah, yeah,
don't
they
know
are.
why anybody ever got the idea that they were anything but.
Coulrophobia, COULRO phobia is
Fantastic.
the
Thank
fear
you.
or phobia
I've
of
learned
clowns.
something today there.
Yeah.
Um, so Didymus said the Seventh Doctor was my first Doctor, and I think he made me the raging lefty I am today.
Oh, hooray. Yes.
So by
Overthrow the
proxy-
government.
My
Cheers,
work here is
Andrew.
done. I'll wrap up
that's
now,
it,
guys. Fine.
So they also said you wanted to bring back the enigmatic nature of the Doctor, so we got the other plus tantalising glimpses of an unknown backstory, which seemed to place the Doctor at the heart of the Time Lord's own creation myth. How much of this master plan was fully worked out, or was it made up as you
Well,
went
it
along?
was, I mean, you've basically summarized it there. You don't want to work out too much detail because the whole point is to avoid detail and replace detail with mystery. And that sort of touches on something that Paul was saying earlier about Ghostlight, where the Doctor appears to be pulling the strings. That, you see, that technique, it's a cheap trick, but it's a really good trick because what it does is it means that you can have the Doctor do virtually nothing for an entire story. And then it turns out that he was responsible for everything. So he doesn't have a lot to do, but he suddenly turns out that he is the hero. Plus, it makes him a particular kind of hero, which is the kind of hero we want. We want the master chess player, the puppet master. That's the kind of hero you want the Doctor to be. I mean, he could be an action hero as well, but I think intrinsically he needs to be that other kind of hero to have the kind of awe and mystery aspect. And also, as a time traveler, I think that kind of comes with the territory.
What did you think of the Timeless Children storyline that they did recently, which kind of added more mystery to the Doctor?
Well, is that the Chibnall one where he started doing backstory? Okay, so I've got to be clear with you guys. I've seen almost none of the shows except the occasional Christmas special, including this year with Millie Gibson, which I was really great story. So I know almost none of it. But from what my understanding of it is that Chibnall just made the classic era of beginning to explain stuff again. Like he said, oh, the Doctor is more than just a Time Lord. Then he started getting into details. You don't want to go much further than the Doctor is just a Time Lord. It's more than a Time Lord. As soon as you start nailing down specifics, you're back with a problem, which is, making him too mundane and too explained. This is my feeling.
Or did it have the reverse effect and say, well, actually, so much has been explained about the Doctor. Actually, none of that is potentially true. The Doctor is still an unknown because we don't know where they came from. We don't know who they are again. And we're not likely to find out anytime soon. Possibly.
Well, exactly what I wanted to achieve when I sort of said, everything at the Doctor is a Time Lord. It's true, but it's not the whole story. So he's not just a Time Lord. So that saves you denying all previous continuity, but at the same time, it puts it in a new context.
Exactly. But, talking about continuity, there's I'm just going to read a quote from Script Doctor because I absolutely love this.
Well, thank you.
I love this book, and I would recommend it to anybody who loves Doctor Who, not just Seventh Doctor and Andrew's work, but
available online now.
I'm going to throw this away because I absolutely love it. So, okay, and there is going to be a language warning here. There is an F-bomb. There are quite a few of F-bombs throughout
it was taken lit from my diary, which had a lot of swearing.
So, talking about choosing writers, Andrew, you say, in the end, I wanted to shape the character of the show, create a sense of wonder. I wanted to make the Doctor an enigma again and fuck the explanatory lumber of my 20 years of predecessors. Which I think is a brilliant statement as a kind of a mission statement, if you like. Says the continuity of Doctor Who. Yes, it's there and it's glorious and it's wonderful and it's to be enjoyed. But in pushing forward, we don't have to be shackled to any of that.
Well, I always compare it to this is going to sound a bit strange, the hull of a ship, which starts off beautifully smooth and moving through the water with no resistance, and it acquires all the barnacles and stuff on it.
Accumulates barnacles.
Scrape the hull. So basically, it's hull scraping.
There is a little bit there, which perhaps in a show like Doctor Who, which has endured so many years, probably just needs to be done every now and then. But of course, in your time, sadly, we saw the end of Doctor Who, didn't we? I mean, it looks like everything was coming to a close. Season 26, which arguably saw the culmination of all your ideas and all the work and everything else that you guys have been doing, which is massively revered by fans and anybody who actually watches it. But it seemed to be neglected by the BBC. I didn't even know that it was even on at the time. I was literally just sitting on my sofa flicking through channels and Battlefield started. I'm like, well, I don't remember, I didn't see any trailers for this or anything, but
well, they were determined to cancel Doctor Who, and the show had gone through it had gone through the doldrums, and John, the producer, was responsible for that. But he's responsible for running the show into the ground, but as I always say, he was also responsible for running the show out of the ground again.
Yeah.
By the time they cancelled us, we were making a great show.
Yeah.
I really don't think the people who cancelled us could have seen what we were doing or could have understood it, because it's insane. I mean, it's insane to cancel Doctor Who anyway, even if you hate it, because it was a global money spinner.
Yeah.
But to cancel it when it was undergoing a renaissance was really unforgivable.
And replacing it with a pretty bland, fucking awful soap opera, really, as well, which is just like, what the hell?
There's room for awful soap operas on television. But
not in my diary, there isn't.
You don't have to have one or the other.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
It's crazy cancelling Doctor Who, and it was a crime against television.
And I think it is. It's one of those instances where somebody's personal feelings towards it overrode their professional judgment.
But also, it was like their personal feelings about the way it had been 4 years earlier.
Yeah.
It wasn't even about what it was at the time. It's just like they'd made a decision way back when they were hell bent on following through on this stupid decision, even when it was no longer relevant.
Yeah. We had a question here. Paul, I'm not sure if this came from CJ Williams or not, but how would you have liked the Seventh Doctor to go out? That closing speech that you wrote, "Somewhere else the tears getting cold," has become legendary.
Well, I'm very proud of that speech. I still feel a bit guilty for crowbarring it into Rona's show when Rona is such a great writer. But I think that kind of sums it up. I think it's got that elegiac feeling. I don't want to add anything to it, except to say that when I wrote that, I was inspired by Marc Platt and his burnt toast and bus stations. Ghostlight. So it wasn't as though I was coming out of nowhere. I was following in a great tradition of Doctor Who writing.
Yeah,
and it became. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's a great little bit, isn't it? And it kind of hints at what's to come for the pair of them.
I'm so glad that I wrote very little for the show. I was too honourable to commission myself, so I wrote almost nothing for the show. I'm glad that one of the few tiny things I've written for the show has had such resonance and longevity.
Just out of interest, have you read At Childhood's End, which is the book that Sophie wrote, where her Doctor meets Jodie's in the present day, but there's flashbacks to things with the Seventh Doctor?
No, I haven't read it, but I do like the reference to the Arthur C. Clarke title.
Yes, Childhood's End, which is underneath Final Detective there, actually.
Yep.
It's
follows Cartmel on the shelf.
So, I mean, Survival is Survival became the last of the classic series, but it's also, I mean, it's, to me at least anyway, and see if you agree with this, Andrew, but it seems like it kind of bridges the gap in a lot of ways. I mean, firstly, it's kind of set, in a sort of very literal sense. It's set in a sort of world of grey London tower blocks as much as it is the cheetah people and everything else, but also in a kind of metaphorical sense. It's a story that happens in a transition between worlds, and we've also got Ace kind of coming to terms with her sexuality and understanding who she is. Everything seems to be in a state of shift and evolution and movement forward, and in some ways it kind of becomes like the perfect final story of the last series. And we spoke to Rona, didn't we, a little while ago, and we kind of spoke to a few other people where they were sort of saying, well, it's kind of possibly about something, or possibly about this, and Rona is like, no, it's definitely about this. She's absolutely determined, that her story is about all of that stuff. There's no ambiguity there at all.
Well, Rona is a tremendous writer. I mean, I was very lucky in the writers I had, and she was, I mean, not just as a Doctor Who writer, she's one of the best.
I agree.
If the show had to end, and it didn't, but sadly it did end, that was a great one to go out on. And also it was a perfect setup Rose and for Russell for the new series.
Yeah, because it does seem to kind of pick up.
And I'm eternally grateful to Moffat for commissioning Rona to do another one. That was a really classy thing for him to do. So thank you.
Yeah, Eaters of Light, which is another good story. I mean, it's fantastic. So we've got one more comment, which is about the TV movie actually, because we have to, since we're kind of at that place. So Richard Hardman on Facebook says, he agrees, as we all do, season 26 is a masterpiece. But he says that his question would be Seven's regeneration into 8, obviously, was really underwhelming in my opinion for such a great Doctor. How would you, Andrew, have written the 7th Doctor's exit? Was anything kind of formulated?
The thing about the McGann Doctor story, which was directed by Jeff Sachs, I thought it was brilliantly. I've met the director and the writer. They're really nice, really talented guys. I think McGann is a terrific Doctor.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think the handover between Sylvester and McGann is one of the few things that really works in that story for me. You know, he's sitting there and isn't he playing an old 78 RPM record? He's got a cup of tea or something. I was talking about how it needs to have that distinctive English eccentricity. It needs to have that kind of Alice in Wonderland kind of eccentricity to it. And it does, but that's just the beginning. From that point on, it becomes a bit of a transatlantic mishmash, I feel. And that's kind of why I thought it didn't work. I mean, the Doctor's racing around on a motorbike. Mind you, we did that in Delta, didn't we?
There you go. Yeah, you did it.
I shouldn't really knock that. No, I mean, I thought that it was wonderful to see Sylvester, and he handed over to another great Doctor. So that's not really my beef with what happened next. It's just that TV movie just didn't work, despite, as I say, being a confluence of terrific talents.
I have to say, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, and looking at that level, it doesn't. There's so many things that probably could or should have been done differently, but it is what it is. And you know, for me, I just find it really kind of joyous to watch, and I love the fact they brought Sylvester over. They didn't have to do that, right? They could have just started it without any backstory at all, which probably would have been the right thing to do.
But it just, to me, it just wasn't really Doctor Who.
No, but I think what Richard's probably kind of getting at is, you know, we have that great bit in the TARDIS with the cup of tea and everything else, and the Doctor steps outside and is immediately gunned down in a hail of bullets by sort of warring street gangs or something, which perhaps seems a little bit, you know, tragic in a way, immediate for a Doctor that had that cast such a huge shadow over his time on the show, perhaps.
Yeah, but then from the writer in me says that's a great setup for him to be rushed into hospital and to be revealed not to be, you know, and then
that's fair enough.
You can involve a doctor as a medical doctor as a character. These are all great decisions, but it didn't add up to a show that worked for me.
That's fair enough. No, we all like different things, which is it. So could you tell us very briefly, because I think it's a crying shame that you didn't write for the show at all, that you didn't commission yourself, because I would have loved to have seen a Doctor Who story by Andrew Cartmel, and it wasn't really until...
And Paul, I would have loved the money. But on the other hand, if I had done that, we would be down one story. And apart from Time in the Rani, there's no stories I'd like to be removed from the canon. So I don't know how that would have worked.
Did you kind of plan a season 27 before the plug was pulled? Were there some ideas?
Only very loosely. We were working out that it would probably be time for the companion. Not that there's anything wrong with Sophie, but just in the great cycle of life, it would be time for the companion to go on, and what kind of companion we were going to go for.
Because we did get things like Earth Aid and Animals and Crime of the Century and the Big Finish.
And those were based on fragments of stuff that we did discuss, and also, in the case of Animal, fragments of stuff we didn't discuss, because when the commission arrived to write the missing stories, we did have a certain amount of material like Earth Aid that we had discussed, and particularly the arrival of the new companion, which was the idea that she would be a posh cat burglar. That was all, you know, that was something that we had discussed, but there wasn't a lot of material there, not enough to do all the stories that Big Finish wanted. So I went online and looked at what the fans thought was going to happen in the next series. An Animal was something that, you know, was somebody out there on the internet had just made it up, but I loved it. So I thought that does sound like me. And I can write that. So I did write that, but it didn't arise out of something that we genuinely did plan. Having said that, Animal is my favorite of those stories that I wrote, because I think the characters, there's a thing about this undercover cop and how he gets involved in a relationship, someone who doesn't know that he's a cop, and that's one of the best character things I've written. And there's also a really great speech in that nobody's ever noticed, which if I ever get to write for the TV show, I'm going to bring back. And if I do get to write it for the TV show, everybody's going to say, "Oh, what a great speech!" It's a Doctor Who classic.
So from that, I take it if you were asked to write for the modern TV show, you'd pretty much say yes, yeah?
I'd love to, and I always say at this point that Ben had a great. I don't know if he'd want to do it now, but he had this wonderful Doctor Who story that he often would talk to me about. But I think he might well have moved beyond wanting to work on Doctor Who now. I'd love to write a Doctor Who. It'd be fabulous.
We'll start a petition for Russell here.
Start the campaign. Get Andrew back on the show right now. We need to see Andrew's story.
Petitions are the best way to achieve it, but I'd love to do it.
No. Well, I mean, we got your new adventures stories as well, don't we? The War Child, Warlock, Warhead, Warlock, and War Child. The three of those.
My sister always said if I did another one, I should call it Wardrobe.
There you go. Yeah.
Now that's an idea I need to hear.
Yeah, but they're kind of cool, you know, that sort of cyberpunk sort of 90s kind of vibe.
Yeah, the trouble with those books to me is that I was teaching myself to write, and when I look back at them, I just see all the things that I haven't got right yet.
Yeah,
I know that they're highly influential, and they were certainly are an effective dystopian cyberpunk take on the stories.
I think so. So before we sign off, Andrew, I'm just going to ask you to play one little game for us, if you would be so kind, sir. Take probably 5 minutes or so. And I don't know how familiar you are. You said you haven't kind of watched much of the new series, but there is a moment at the end of series 13, also known as Flux, whereby the Doctor dispatches our bad guy to an asteroid at the edge of the universe, and he has nothing to play with. We are going to do that to you. We are going to banish you to this asteroid on the edge of beyond.
Desert Island Discs, Doctor Who.
Indeed, yes. You see what we did there, but a slight Doctor Who spin on it. And we are actually going to give you something to take with you, so you can have that. But your choice must be only one of these things. Okay, so if you're ready, I'm going to ask you to take with you to your Grand Serpent's asteroid one favorite album on vinyl, and we'll give you the kit to play it on, so you can have a Riga turntable and all the speakers and everything else.
It's a really obvious choice, but I'm afraid it's going to have to be Kind of Blue by Miles Davis.
Ooh. And you could listen to that to the end of eternity as you float amongst the loneliness of the stars.
Well, probably not, but it's got a better chance than anything else.
That's fair enough. You're also allowed to take with you one favorite book series when you're not listening to music.
Book series. Okay, the Travis McGee novels by John D. MacDonald.
Oh, interesting.
Series of crime novels. There's about 21 of them. I think he's the finest crime writer ever to come out of America, but not very well known.
Fantastic.
No, not had
no. Just, don't break the spines on those. You are allowed to take with you one favorite movie. What would that be?
That's a good question. Maybe The Last Picture Show by Peter Bogdanovich and Larry McMurtry.
Another interesting choice. And one Seventh Doctor story.
Let's take Remembrance. Yeah.
Remembrance. And we will throw in Time in Irani for you as well, actually, so you can enjoy that on a continuously. One of my questions here was, has the years softened your response to Time in Irani?
In fact, over the years, I worked out all the mistakes I made, and I just regret not doing the right thing. What I should have done is said, look, guys, I understand that you have a previous relationship with these writers, that you'd already commissioned a story, that they're very intent on doing it their way, not my way, and that I'm a newbie and these people have had decades of experience. So here's what I want them to do exactly the story you want, but I want my name taken off it as a script editor, because if I am the script editor, then I want to either sack these writers or completely rewrite their scripts. And if I'm not the script editor on this particular story, I want my name removed from it so that I won't share in the praise or the blame. So that's what I should have done. And if I had done that, well, they might have sacked me, or they might have realized how seriously I didn't like the story. But I didn't do that. But that's what I should have done. And so has my feelings softened? My feelings about Pip and Jane have softened because I see them in the round as people. I don't see them as pantomime demons. But I don't like my feelings about the poor quality of that story has only hardened.
Yeah, I must admit, it's not one of my favorites
It was the
in
first one out of the
slightest.
gate. People all
Yeah.
judged me and Sylvester and the show on the basis of that story, and it was a disaster from that point of view. So there you go.
Final question: your happiest memory from working on Doctor Who? Can it be boiled down to one memory or collection?
I don't know. I think about hanging around the office with Katie Steele, and let's say with me and Ben and Katie still hanging around together in the Doctor Who office, chatting. I think that would probably be a very nice memory. Also, snogging a Kang in the lift was pretty good, but that's probably not quite up there.
And if you want to know more about that, read Andrew's diary's Script Doctor. It's right here. You can order that online, and it is fantastic. I would also recommend.
Very kind of you, Paul.
You're very welcome. But I would also recommend Vinyl Detective and definitely the Paperback Sleuth, which is just astonishingly brilliant. I love it to bits. And the second novel, just to remind everyone how we started, is out now. It's called ASHRAM Assassin. Do please buy it because it's hilarious.
If you're listening to this before the end of July 2024, come to my play called Dressing Down at the Tabard Theatre.
Well done.
In Chiswick, London.
Chiswick.
Sorry, guys, had to get that in there.
No,
that's right. We'll forgive you, Andrew. It has been an absolute pleasure and a delight talking to you, my friend. I wish you all the very best in everything you do next, and I look forward to seeing it. So, thank you for popping onto our podcast, and wish you well, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks,
Andrew Cartmel.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bless you.